Well, I mean, we're in the midst of what is in effect a long pivot as Russia pivots away from the special military operation toward something new. Russia hasn't defined it yet. I imagine that the Russians have a plan because they mobilized 300,000 men. I don't think that figure was picked out of thin air. But this is not going to happen overnight. I think that's what people need to understand is that when NATO made the decision to pour tens of billions of dollars worth of military materiel and financial support and training and intelligence support and communication support and logistic support and a strategic depth that's outside of the direct reach of the Russian military, this was a game-changing event. It literally transformed the entire nature of the special military operation. Whether Russia should have predicted this or not, that's a different, that's a strategic question that needs to be addressed down the road. I will tell you that General Milley didn't predict it because when General Milley testified before the United States Congress prior to, he was saying that Russia should be in Kiev within 72 hours. I would imagine that General Milley's assessment was shared with his NATO brethren and that the overall feeling in NATO and in Europe was that there was little that anybody could do militarily to stop the Russians from achieving their short-term military objectives, and that the best hope for NATO and Europe and the United States was to levy massive, unprecedented sanctions against Russia in hope that the ensuing collapse of the Russian economy would lead to a political change in Russia that could therefore be pressured to withdraw from Kiev. That seemed to be the direction that the West was heading. So if that's the way the West was heading and Russian intelligence being what it is, I would imagine that was the assessment of Russia too, that there's little NATO can do other than continuing to provide the low-grade light weapon support that NATO was not going to commit decisively. And moreover, Russia was convinced that not only would the sanctions not hurt Russia, but that Russia would be able to flip the script and have the sanctions have blowback on the European and global economy, at least the global economy of those nations who were aligned against Russia. So I don't think Russia was too worried about it. Phase one of the operation, I think there was, and I've written about this, I believe that the Russians had specific intelligence that turned out to be wrong about the level to which the Ukrainian army and Ukrainian civil servants would back a Russian action. I think the Russians, and we're seeing this play out, and we'll talk about it more. I think in a critical theater, the Western military district has grossly underperformed. Absolute command failure, and it may be a more systemic failure than that. There's something fundamentally wrong with the Western military district. And that caused Russia to maybe not achieve the shock and awe collapse of the Kiev government that it appears they were hoping for. The notion that they were going to take Kiev is absurd. They were not going to take Kiev. What they wanted to do is shock Kiev into surrendering. And failing to do that, then shape the battlefield in a way that was advantageous to Russia achieving its strategic objective of claiming control over the Donbass, along with other territorial objectives that operated in direct support of that. For instance, the seizure of Kherson, which provides strategic depth to Crimea, secures water supplies, and then the seizure of Zaporizhia, which creates the land bridge that connects the Crimea-Kherson area into Donbass. I think that's all part of a supporting operation. And the fact that Russia achieved this shows that they're not militarily incompetent. The Russians seized 20% more. I mean, they seized closer to 30% of Ukraine, if you include the Kharkov territories and the territories around Kiev. And then this summer we saw Russia basically get into the game of grinding down the most dug-in, entrenched military force in modern history. And this was done in a way designed to maximize Ukrainian casualties, minimize Russian casualties, and at the end, by June, July, I think we can safely say that Russia destroyed the Ukrainian military. All of the equipment that had been in existence in Ukraine prior to February 24th kickoff of the special military operation had been destroyed. Of a 260,000 regular force, the Russians had killed over 60,000, had wounded more than 40,000. That's close to 50% casualties. No military force can sustain that level of casualties and continue to fight as a cohesive unit. The Ukrainians poured in a lot of territorial defense units, basically sacrificing blood for time. And that time was used to good effect by NATO, which by April made the decision that they were going to transition into big time support for the Ukrainians. I think the level of the Ukrainian defense, combined with clear examples of Russian incompetence in the Western Military District, I think the NATO overinterpreted the Russian military incompetence to be systemic throughout, not understanding that it was localized, viewed this as a terminal Russian weakness, and decided that they could intervene. Now, they weren't going to intervene directly by sending in NATO forces, but they intervened in a way that transformed the Ukrainian military, reconstituted into a de facto NATO military, to include thousands of Western mercenaries who served as shock troops for this new force, to include direct links between NATO intelligence and Ukrainian commanders on the ground, replicating the same connectivity that the United States used, for instance, in the fight against ISIS that we had with Iraqi frontline fighters, and later on the Kurds in Syria, where they would have iPad-type devices and the intelligence would be fed directly to them, and they would act on that. They could call in airstrikes using the pad. There was that kind of connectivity. And I think the United States has replicated that connectivity down to the tactical level for the Ukrainians, which allows real-time intelligence to be shared. And what this gives is the Ukrainians have been able to exploit Russian deficiencies in a real-time basis with speed and maneuver and firepower. The Ukrainians have been trained to carry out, in the U.S. we understand that hip shoot type capabilities with field artillery, meaning that they can rapidly receive a target, rapidly get steel on target, because they have artillery units that are ready to respond in that manner. The Russians, meanwhile, still hold on to their doctrinal artillery approach, which is massed firepower against a fixed enemy. If you're going to be responding to a more mobile enemy, then you need to have more reactive capabilities, which if the NATO forces were attacking directly into the teeth of a Russian military unit, then those firepowers came to bear and destroy. We see example after example after example of what happens when a Ukrainian force gets hit by massed Russian fires. It's death and destruction all around. But what happens when you have, for instance, two SWAT teams occupying a village that have not adequately tied into their left and to their right, so there's gaps, and they don't have the ability to communicate directly with artillery, so the artillery fires aren't responsive. And no matter how brave they are, they will be surrounded, and the enemy will penetrate into the depth. And this is what happened at the beginning of the Kharkov offensive. The NATO intelligence found a seam in the Russian defenses, and the NATO army, that is now the Ukrainian army, was able to rapidly exploit that seam, and Russian fires were not coordinated sufficiently to blunt this and defeat this, and the end result was absolute chaos. Now, the Russians withdrew in good order, but a retreat is a retreat is a retreat. And they retreated. And anytime you retreat, you create a situation where you are not in the strongest of positions. You're vulnerable.
Lots of propaganda exploitation.
Well, not just propaganda, but also on the ground.
Right.
You know, you're retreating into new positions. If you've already shown an organizational predilection for failing to tie into your left and your right, and now you withdraw to new positions, have you suddenly woken up to the need to tie in? Is the artillery fully coordinated now, or through the chaos, are there more seams created? And unfortunately for the Russians in the city of Lyman, another seam was detected. Again, 2 volunteer battalions, some of the most courageous men in the Russian military, easily matching the SWAT team that made their valiant stand up in the Kharkov area. These battalions, they fought, but they basically said, we don't have an artillery forward observer with us. We don't have a fire support team with us. So we have to pass our request for fires through this very laborious process. And by the time the artillery arrives, the enemy's no longer there. So if you can't use fires to break up the enemy advance, and the enemy is coming at you with 150 armored vehicles, and you're 500 men with light weapons, eventually the math doesn't work out for the guys with light weapons, and they were surrounded and compelled to retreat, as was the case. And through that retreat, chaos assumes, takes over, and NATO again was able to provide real-time battlefield intelligence of the seams, of the weaknesses that were exploited. And this is what we're seeing. And I think they found another seam down in the Kherson area, and they're exploiting that. So it looks bad for Russia, but it's not. Right. And the reason why it's not is that the Russians right now are at their weakest, literally. I mean, we know they had insufficient forces to the task. We know that. They've acknowledged that. They've acknowledged and said this is a game-changing event. We have to change the game. We're mobilizing more troops. In the meantime, we're going to defend. And that's what they're doing. The one thing that hasn't occurred is that Russia has not suffered catastrophic losses.
Right.
The side that is suffering catastrophic losses is the Ukrainians. In many ways, these offensive successes are Pyrrhic in nature. They're suffering, thousands of casualties, hundreds of losses in heavy equipment for territorial gains that are not permanent, nor can they be permanent politically. And we'll get into because of the decision by Russia to absorb these territories into Russia. That means that going forward, this is not a battle between Ukrainians and Russians on Ukrainian soil.
Right.
This is a battle between a NATO Ukrainian military against Russia on Russian soil, and that changes the entire psychological dynamic. And the fact of the matter is, Ukraine has given it everything. And I'll just pause and say right here, I think you and I have the same low level of admiration for the Ukrainian government and for the neo-Nazis that populate it and for the ideology, etc. But Ukrainian soldier, hats off, man. I mean, sure. Hats off to these guys. They're tough fighters. They're brave. They're courageous. They're everything you would want in a combat soldier. And we should never minimize the courage it has taken for the Ukrainians to accomplish what they have accomplished. The sad thing is that these brave soldiers are fighting against equally brave soldiers, and at the end of the day, we're seeing tens of thousands of people who represent the finest of their nation's genetic makeup being slaughtered on the battlefield, and this is just this is the real tragedy here. Russia is going to win. They're in a long pivot, and that's what I keep trying to tell people is, they're like, why aren't the Russians doing this? Why? I said, it's because it's a long pivot.
And they know the winter, they know the weather.
They know their plan. I mean, that's the other thing. There's no panic. The only place you see panic right now is in Kiev, in Brussels, and in Washington, D.C., as they rapidly try to figure out how do we respond to this? How do we respond? What do we do?
Well, let me just add to that too. The other accelerant of political disintegration are all of these leaders who are, as you've said and agreed with too, they're all disintegrating in their power in their own domestic countries, from Britain to Italy to Sweden. You see the discontent of the mediocre populations of Europe that really don't have any hardcore passions except to stay alive and not freeze and eat. And suddenly that's in jeopardy. And that's emphasized in double jeopardy with the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So, now we're a slave to the US. Now we have to buy oil and gas for 4 times as much, maybe 10 times as much. What are we going to eat? We've abandoned civilized living to go back to a dark age of woke, environmental, climate change, rainbow flag worshiping liberal leftist Democrat types in the EU. All of this is rippling ideologically throughout the population. It's a slow rise, but I think this boil is only going to get more poisonous as winter and hardships and the rhetoric of these the politicians too doesn't change. There's nothing new they can say. It's just all the same garbage of European values and all of this stuff that just doesn't stick. And people are moving in a direction. So the hyperactivity, you see it Macron too. Now he's calling for anti-Russian, anti-China. Well, now you're bringing China. Now you're throwing darts at China. So I just wanted to add in there seems to be plate tectonic shifts politically in Europe and in the US. I think unless they try and steal another election and totally exercise algorithmic manipulation like they did before in 2020, the Democrats and leftists in general, I think, are going to go for a sweeping defeat, because no one wants this hostility with Russia. No one likes the idea of biochemical labs being put in Ukraine that are directly linked to the potential research that led to COVID-19 and all sorts of other things, as we've seen the documents. I mean, these are genocide, war crime evidence of serious crimes that the West has been doing. But I don't want to get too far afield, but I just wanted to identify there are political reverberations that are happening that would seem to perfectly do a dovetail with the military kinetic advances that you're describing, in Ukraine.
Well, I mean, we start with, Clausewitz 101. War is an extension of politics by other means.
Amen.
And right now, everybody's laser focused on, Krasny Limon, on, other areas now, these battles being fought. Sure, when you get down close, it's ugly. I mean, I continue just to bang my head against the wall as to at the level of incompetence being shown by aspects of the Russian military. Artillery. Why don't
have you seen any propaganda psyop sort of mass flooding of the Ukrainian military consciousness with like we did in Iraqi freedom, or the first 1990 Gulf War, dropping leaflets, pleading for surrender, save yourselves, save your family, save your culture, save Ukraine. Has there been any massive Russian propaganda information operations, psychological operations, to cultivate a mind that would be receptive to not defeat, not surrender, but a peace settlement that has on its conditions some of the things Russia wanted, and building Ukraine? Has Russia engaged in any of those direct psyop operations?
Well, my understanding is early on in the conflict, yes, the artillery units were firing leaflet shells and things like that. Look, Russia's not looking for a negotiated settlement. That day is over. All this nonsense about getting Ukraine to the negotiating table. Russia has said there are two main objectives: denazification, demilitarization. Demilitarization has always been defined as removing the NATO influence on the Ukrainian military.
Right.
Now that the Ukrainian military has transitioned to a 100% de facto proxy of NATO, demilitarization means the total destruction of the Ukrainian military. That's what's going to happen, the total destruction of it.
Yeah.
denazification, let's just cut to the chase. Putin has labeled the Zelensky government as a Nazi regime.
Yep.
So we know what denazification entails. It means regime change and the complete eradication of anything, when we, in Iraq, we called it de-Baathification, to get rid of the Baath party. Here it's going to be de-Bandera. Getting rid of anything that's touched by Bandera. And this means, we talked about the interview with Andrei Gorulov, the former lieutenant general, current member of parliament, man with the ear of Vladimir Putin. He's not the national decision maker, so everything he says has to be taken with a grain of salt. He's very aggressive, sometimes too aggressive, meaning that he gets ahead of the Russian government skis. But when he said that Russia is going to the Polish border, I tend to believe him because that's the only way you accomplish denazification. So any notion that Russia today would be engaging in a psyop to convince the Ukrainians to return to negotiations there will be no negotiations. The only way this ends is with the unconditional surrender of Ukraine, which means that at some point in time, Zelensky will be dead or removed from power. There will be a Ukrainian general surrounded in a bunker who will radio out that he's ready to sign the surrender documents, and that will happen. But there's a long pivot to get there. But we focus in on the battlefield and all that. The more we focus out, the more the reality changes. When you come in, and especially when you focus in on the areas that the Western media wants you to focus in on, Krasny Le Monde, the successes and all that, it looks pretty bad for Russia. Now you pull out and you go, well, wait a minute. Reinforcements coming in. I mean, it still sucks, but they've stabilized it. Pull out a little bit more. Wait a minute. Those gains aren't that much, and there's 300,000 guys mobilizing here, and you pull out more and you say, Russia's getting ready to transform the whole nature of this thing. They have 800 aircraft that have yet to be committed, and if they go to a strategic air campaign, we take Ukraine off of the, logistical, political, electrical grid for everything, and suddenly it doesn't look so good to be Ukrainian. And then we pull out a little bit more and we realize that, there's three elements to this war. There's the military element, which frankly speaking is the least important. Why? Because the military element, especially Ukraine's connectivity with NATO and the United States, is linked to the political element. And the political element, we see while there's a lot of rhetoric that continues to exist in the political and economic elites of Europe and the United States about supporting Ukraine to the bitter end, that's not backed by anything of substance. As you alluded to, I believe there is a wave of revolutionary transformation, and I use that word very carefully, because this is going to go beyond simple democratic correction. That the anger that's being felt in Europe will manifest itself in a way that doesn't just sweep, replace one elite with another elite. It's going to sweep the elites off the political map. And this is a transformative period of time. And what will be replaced is something that there is no unity. Right now, the United States hinges on the triple unity of NATO, the European Union, and the G7. The G7, of course, being the economic extension of the NATO EU. But what we're seeing right now is NATO literally at war with itself. Zelensky came out and asked for accelerated entry into NATO. NATO has what you've seen is NATO as an organization said no. The United States said no. 10 nations, of course, jumped up and said, yes, we're in favor of it.
Idiot nations that have barely even gotten their flying wins, right? Slovakia, Czech, Latvia, and a few of these other former.
Right, but but now we know who's driving this conflict.
Yeah.
Is those 10 nations.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a split, strategic split, as this revolution continues, where Italy, France, Germany are going to be weaned away from that. So you're going to see a split there, and the split's already manifesting itself. Poland, ridiculously asking for over $1 trillion in reparations from World War II of Germany. And the Germans coming back saying, if you want to pick that scab, Silesia belongs to us. How do you want to? So I would not be surprised if we saw the mobilization of the German army to the Polish border. I mean, this is serious stuff that they're talking about here. Turkey and Greece are getting ready to go to war over the Aegean Islands. France has indicated that that happens, they will join the side of Greece. That's 5 NATO nations that are, at war with themselves. There is no NATO unity, none whatsoever. There's American dictation, there is Stoltenberg repetition, but then when it comes down, to give you an example of the strategic gap, Stoltenberg speaks. Now, people need to understand, even though he's the Secretary General of NATO, the general doesn't mean he commands anything. He commands nothing. He is literally a bureaucrat who manages the technical side, the administrative side, not even so much, but he manages the organization. But the real power is in the military committee, because this is a military alliance. The military committee makes the decisions. The military committee doesn't report to him, by the way. It reports to the commander, the military commander of NATO, who is the director. So Secretary General can say all the things he wants to say. Military commander can literally just push him aside and say, no, we're doing X. The military committee said, we are not going to war with Russia. We are not going to war with Russia. That is not what this is all about. We will continue to provide material support. But any notion that we're somehow going to go to war with Russia is ludicrous. So you see within NATO, there's a divide, but there's a divide throughout Europe. You see nations starting to say, we can't supply any more weaponry. The German parliament has come out and voted decisively against providing Ukraine with heavy weaponry. I think Italy is going to have similar, movement in that direction. France, talk about people hating each other. The French, were selling these Caesar artillery pieces to the Dutch. And they just told the Dutch, nah, you ain't getting them. We're giving them to Ukraine. The Dutch are going, no, they belong to us. And so now there's this falling apart. Europe is falling apart. So the political opposition to Russia that takes the form of NATO, the European Union, and the G7, all 3 of those institutions are at real risk. And now we pull out to the biggest aspect of this, the economic, the sanctions. The reason why there's so much political division is that the economic sanctions that were supposed to crush Russia, compel change, etc., backfired, and they're crushing Europe as we speak. I mean, Europe is in a free fall. It's not like it's uncomfortable. They jumped off the cliff and they don't have a parachute, and there's no hope. It's going to be a hard impact, and they're done. And the problems that Europe's facing aren't problems that can be readily turned around. There is no short pivot for Europe. We're talking about, foundational change politically, economic. Businesses are shutting down that will never reopen. Never reopen. The jobs are being lost that will never come back. Tax bases are being disrupted in a way that economies won't be able to sustain this. The German economy is going to collapse. There's just no other way around it. It is going to collapse. The British economy is collapsing. I mean, the pound, whoever thought that the pound would be worth less than $1? Wow. And it's going to go even worse. The euro is valueless because the euro stands for nothing. If Italy withdraws from the economic union, the euro will collapse. If Germany collapses, the euro will collapse. I mean, you're going to be left with France saying, we're the Bank of Europe, so we're just going to call it the franc and get back to our business. And then when that happens, all those pathetic little countries that rallied around Ukraine and NATO they're going to be isolated because their economies can't function without Europe underwriting them. And when Europe collapses, because the sovereign nations have said we need to support our country before we support anything else, these countries will be left holding a big empty bag, and nobody's gonna be able to pay for it. And what they want the American taxpayer to pay for it. And this is where the elections this November come in. I don't see the Republicans fundamentally changing the approach towards Russia because they've bought into the same Russophobic.
I know that's the sad and amazing thing is that
but like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, she's bought into these same policies, but she also knows who butters her bread. And it ain't NATO, it ain't the EU, it ain't the G7, it's the Italian people. And if she doesn't enact policies that benefit the Italian people, then she'll be voted out of office. So I think you're going to see her making a rapid pivot away from the transfer of billions of dollars of national resources into a failed project, and instead diverting them to help Italy. And I think that's what we're going to see in the United States. It's not that the Republicans suddenly have gone soft on Russia. Is that the Republicans will understand that which got them elected was the economy, and that they must do what's best for the economy. And it's very difficult to tell people that we can't afford to give you, $10 billion, $20 billion to fix infrastructure, fix this, when we're sending all that money to Ukraine. So I do think that we're going to see in Congress, not so much, a love affair with Russia, but just the reality that what's happening with Russia is far away from our shores and has no direct impact on the national security of the United States. Therefore, maybe we need to focus on shoring up our problems here at home. And the problems are many and they are manifest.
Well, Scott, I'm listening to President Putin's speech that he gave before the Russian Duma or various politicians on the absorption, the referendum of Lugansk and Donetsk and these areas, which I thought was quite a spectacular spectacle, if you will, with the stages and music and flags and fireworks and singing beautiful girl musicians and the tears rolling down the cheeks. I thought it was a powerful exhibition of genuine Russian love of country. They have this deep in their hearts. There's no other people that have a love of their motherland, their country, and are so rejoicing in their language and their identity. I mean, Russians really do have that. And I guess you can understand why, after suffering these attacks for the last, 300 years from various parties. But Putin gave a speech, and I think it was a brilliant speech, and he identified every historical crime that the colonial powers had engaged in, from the impregnation of China with opium through the French and the British colonial system, to Africa, to the recognition NATO and the West have only deceived us and damaged us and tried to dismember us. And I mean, he summed everything up, that they've taken 30 years to kind of go, okay, if that's the way you want it, that's what it is. That's your real position. There was no agenda for friendship. There was only an agenda for, hostility, rape, and taking the resources. So Putin's speech, which was quite powerful, I think radiates a renewed national consensus. And I want to bring it to you. One of the things that you had mentioned with the Russian general politician was, can we get back to a semblance, if not friendship, then kind of tolerance, or get back to normal. But I would say we conservatives in America, I think, would want and cultivate friendship with Russians. Anyone who knows Russians knows they are conservative. They're a traditional family values. Yeah, you have, all sorts of colors and brands and mafia and bad guys and stuff. But overall, I found the Russian personality to be very conservative. And Putin seemed to readdress that when he said, do we want to teach our children wokeism and transgenderism, and that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and give them hormone blockers and get rid of the words mother and father? Do we want to go in that direction? And they all say resoundingly no. So, you know, I'll put it back to you in the last few minutes we have for part one. I hope we do a part two. But I think, what is your thought on the deeper emotional, philosophical impulses and instincts in your experience with the Russian people and the Russian culture? How do you see that perhaps bridging for the first time the media propaganda wall or cloud that they've tried to put up that says, you know, they're your enemies of everything American, and they're not. How do you see this, you know, moving in a potential cultivating not just tolerance, but really a renaissance or a reawakening of a friendship that has always been under the surface, but has never been allowed to really spout out?
Well, let's start off by pointing out that first of all, let's talk about Putin's speech for a second. I think it will go down in history as one of the greatest speeches, one of the most historically relevant speeches of this century.
I agree.
Clearly, it's the most important speech given this century so far. Yep. You know, who knows what's going to happen in the future? You know, there might be more important speeches, but right now it is clearly the most important speech, and that's why everybody should listen to it over and over and over again. You know, any affinity that Russia may have towards, you know, American conservatives, though, is quickly quashed by the fact that America is a deeply divided nation. And we operate in political cycles. And so because we don't have a political center anymore, we tend to gravitate from one extreme to the other in terms of, you know, who's in office. And for the Russians, that's just unacceptable, because let's say there's a, you know, a conservative government that the Russians find appealing in terms of, yes, we can do business with them. But then the Russians know that in 8 years, there could be a liberal government that no longer is appealing. And that's a roller coaster ride the Russians have been on. And I don't think they necessarily want to go on again. So while I think we in the United States, especially conservatives, believe that, you know, we're ready to have good relations with Russia, that we see there's a possibility for that. From the Russian perspective, America as a whole is an unworthy partner. That doesn't mean that Russia will walk away from us, but I just think it means that their expectations are going to be grounded in a reality. Look, as they've pointed out over and over again, they didn't withdraw from the ABM treaty. They didn't withdraw from the INF treaty. They didn't withdraw from Open Skies. They didn't sabotage CFE. All of the fundamental arms control treaties, which could serve as a future, you know, path towards, you know, a diplomatic reconciliation, have been violated by the United States. The START treaty today is being violated by the United States. So I think there's a long way to go before Russia can ever be in a position to trust the United States ever again. And I think that was played out in there. There's a fundamental disconnect between Russian values and American values, because American values, even though, you know, they include conservative values, they also include left, you know, progressive values, wokeism, whatever terms you want to use, and Russia just doesn't want to have anything to do with that. The other thing, though,
it's a crime against humanity, and I agree with Putin. It is a crime against humanity to tell little boys you can throw on a wig, cut off your penis, and pretend you're a girl. It is a crime against humanity to give girls hormone blockers and chop off their breasts and say you can swim in a man's swim race. There is something spiritually dead and fundamentally insane with a people and a culture and a country and a government that believes that.
Right, but so long as we have 81 million people willing to vote for a man who embraces that, that's going to be a political reality here in the United States, and the Russians recognize that. It ain't going away. I mean, even if Republicans win, you know, if we win, it's going to be because we got 81 million votes and they got 78 million votes. That's still 78 million people who embrace a vision for America that Russia doesn't want to be a part of.
Good point.
So I think there's a fundamental break here, and until America, and again, it's not my place to dictate to America. America has to sort out who it wants to be as a collective, and we are in a struggle. I happen to share your opinion about the transgendered issue, but we also have to acknowledge that there's a significant number of people who are not aligned. And this is the United States. For the moment, it continues to be a functioning democracy. A second, I don't know why these people call me out of the blue, but so we're there. But the other aspect of Putin's speech, and this is a very important one. Russia has a poison in it. It's a poison that grew out of the 1990s. It's a poison that actually grew out of Perestroika. And Perestroika didn't start to be a poison, but Perestroika was a sorry about that.
CIA disruption.
Yeah, but the Perestroika could have been something different, but never got its feet, never got started.
It was the greatest tragedy, I think, in the history of American foreign policy was the race.
Yeah, we failed. Ronald Reagan opened the door, and George H.W. Bush slammed it shut, and that was the end of that. And then we have the 1990s, and this was a period of, unless you lived through it, and I can't say I personally, I was there, I saw it, but I have very close relatives. My wife's family, they lived through it, and we experienced the horrors of the 1990s through them.
Yeah.
The sheer panic of trying to live in a society where everything is, there is no future, there is no hope, everything's falling apart, the desperation, etc. And then, to get out of it, the West offered the narcotic of consumerism.
Yeah.
And many Russians bought into that narcotic. They became addicted to that narcotic. That narcotic was also closely affiliated with the trying to come up with a politically correct term, but there is none, the rape of the Russian economy by the oligarchs.
Yeah.
And so when Vladimir Putin, whom almost everybody acknowledges was an accidental president,
yes.
He was not, he came into the position through serendipity. The concept that this is some deep KGB plan and all that, no. He was in the position, he got it. It just turns out that he happened to be the right man for the job.
Yeah.
And he started to lead Russia out of that dark period of time. But the fact is, he alienated many in the West, and by doing so, he alienated a significant portion of Russian population. When he wins an election, he wins by 60, 70%, but that means that there's 30, 40% of people who don't like him. In a nation of 150 million, that translates into a significant part of the population. I interviewed in the past Alexander Khodakovsky. He's a frontline commander with Vostok. They call it the Vostok Battalion, but it's more like a brigade-sized unit now. Significant leader, great moral presence, good fighter. But he writes an interesting blog, and he has called it out. He said, "We are not our grandparents.
Yeah.
We are not our this generation is not the generation of our grandparents. We have many people who are unworthy of the Russian motherland. We have people who don't rally. There's a reason why 250,000 military-age men fled Russia when the mobilization took place, because they no longer identified with the values of Russia. They identified with the artificial Russia, the weakened Russia, the non-Russia that the West was trying to sell. This model of Russian consumerism that was married at the hip with the West, in effect a master-slave relationship, but the Russians didn't see that. And it also infected society with, again, a kind of Western consumerism that was greed-based, not not about doing it for the betterment of society, but what's in it for me. Very selfish approach. And this has gone into the military. We see this because as the Russians are mobilized, and we see that there are military commissariats that have failed, because instead of investing the money the way it was supposed to be, they sold off the goods, they took the money themselves, there was this corruption. We see in the military itself, this volunteer system, this contract system. And we see, look, the United States isn't perfect either. We saw this too. Remember in the Gulf War, in the lead up to the Gulf War, when all the reservists got called up, they're like, what, I have to leave college? You can't make me leave college. I joined the reserves to get money for college. No, you joined the reserves to serve your country when they said it's time to serve. And there was a huge problem. That's one of the reasons why the Army couldn't generate functioning reserve units that were deployable. Total breakdown in the system. They tried to improve it, but again, people were joining the Guard, joining the reserves for economic reasons, not for patriotic reasons. That doesn't mean there weren't patriots. I'm not saying there weren't. I'm just saying that there was a systemic problem here. It happens everywhere. That problem exists in Russia. Imagine, for instance, I'm a contract soldier and I want to join, and I come in and I say, I want to join I want to be assigned to the 1st Guards Tank Army. Why? Because I go on parades in Moscow, baby. And when after the parade, I get to walk through the streets of Moscow in my uniform, and the women love me. And I love this life. I love eating, drinking. I love the women, and I love the soft life. All I have to do is look good in uniform, parade every once in a while, go out and do drills. That's what I want. And what, you're sending me to Ukraine? Are you crazy? I don't want to go to Ukraine. I want to continue to parade. I want to continue to have women and wine and the great life. And the supposedly elite unit now comes down. And it's not that it's 100%, but all it takes is 2%, 5%. It just takes a little bit of poison to ruin everything. It's the same thing with guys who are in the Southern Military District. These are places where you have a lot of post-Soviet hangover. So you have facilities that are being torn down, and they get into the scrap metal business. And so they're supposed to be the Army, but instead of training, they take the guys in and say, we're going to use those trucks to take this scrap metal, and we're going to send it over the border to Georgia, where I have a contract with the guys who are going to take it out of Cody, and we'll bring the money in, and we all make money. And people hear about that, and they go, oh, I want to volunteer. I want to sign up for the 58, Combined Arms Army, because I hear there's a soft, cushy thing. What, you're sending me to Ukraine? You can't send me to Ukraine. I got to do my scrap metal business. I didn't join the Army to fight. I joined the Army to make money up. And there's this happening too. And I think Putin is basically saying, we don't want this. We don't need this. This is what Russia is. And Russia is. So part of this long pivot that's taking place right now is the purging. And you know what's going to purge it quicker? The 300,000. Why do I say that? Rick Atkinson wrote a great trilogy about the US Army in World War II. And he talks about, in a book, An Army at Dawn, how the US Army transformed. And basically, we get an army that was built up leading up to World War II, and it went in, it didn't perform very well. But then it started to absorb whom? It started to absorb the working man. The working man they said, you're drafted. They didn't go into the draft office saying, take me. They went to the draft office going, this sucks. I don't want to go, but I have to. It's my duty. The wife doesn't like it. The girlfriend doesn't like it. Nobody likes it, but I'm going to do it. But what were they doing? They weren't joining to make a career out of it. They were joining to get the job done. Do what it takes to get the job done so I can come home. And they turned themselves into one of the best militaries the world has ever seen. A military that acted so professional, but was almost entirely composed of amateurs. And everybody's denigrating these 300,000. But when I take a look at them, all I see are men that want to come home. Because it's not men that don't want to fight. The men that don't want to fight left. 450,000 left. These are men who want to come home, but they recognize the only path home is through victory, getting the job done. They're not there to sell scrap metal. They're not there to be in parades. They're there to get the job done. Do they look great? No, they're not parade soldiers. Many of them are like you and I, put on a little bit too much weight, but they're going to work that off. Like Will and Joe in World War II, they're going to be on military rations, doing the military job, They're going to become fit enough.
Yeah.
But the main thing is their mindset's going to be solely focused on getting the job done. And this is the big pivot. It's away from taking this systemically flawed Russian military. And I think this war has shown were major problems with the Russian military that, directly related to the 1990s. I mean, the fact is that poison of the 1990s still exists in Russian society, and it's being squeezed out. It's being squeezed out by what? By demanding a level of patriotism that 250,000 Russian men weren't up to.
Yeah, and the revelation of the hatred that the West and NATO and EU had simmering under their political plastic smiles. They took off the mask and revealed to the Russian people this depth of just sinister hatred and betrayal that I think really shocked them into this overall movement you're describing.
I think it shocked the intellectual class, but I'm not picking on it. It's the same in the United States. I mean, how many Americans after 9/11 really knew what Al-Qaeda was? They were just told Al-Qaeda is bad, and they went, "Yeah, okay, we're there. We're with you on that one." And I think right now the Russians, I'm not saying that they can't, but I'm saying that I think the biggest factor for the average conscript isn't to get involved in a discussion about the geopolitical transformation, the tectonic plate movement that takes Europe away. They're like, I want to come home.
Yes.
I want to go home to my wife. I want to go home to my kids. I want to go home to my job, my neighborhood, my family. I want to go home to Mother Russia. And that's the thing. Mother Russia is being defined. And that's the most important thing about Putin's speech, because Putin put a marker down. He said Putin made a definition of what Mother Russia is, what the history is, etc. And now it's a come to Jesus moment for the Russian people. There are millions of whom are not up to the task. Many of them are leaving.
Yeah.
There are millions of whom have yet to be convinced. But the majority of the Russian people have embraced this model and are going to make this model work. And through that success, others will gravitate to it. And I think Russia comes out of this conflict stronger internally than they've ever been. I think Russia becomes a much more unified nation. I think the poison of Western consumerism that was injected into the Russian system in the 1990s and then festered, as Putin worked to get out of it. People have to understand that Putin is not an absolute dictator.
Right.
And the struggle that he has had to wage against the forces of the collective West that have been trying to destroy Russia from within, it's been a 20-year struggle.
Yes.
And it's still ongoing. And this conflict, I think, is one of those purging moments where a nation will purify itself.
Yes.
Hopefully they don't purify themselves, into a insular, Russia good, the world bad type thing. I think Russian history and Russian culture argues against that. That's not what the
You're right. I think you're right. It would be a deviation from the core Russian personality. There is humility. There is a simplicity in the Russian personality that precludes it from the arrogant delirium that I think has totally taken over the West into a fever of political miscalculation. Russia doesn't have that. They're a very humble, sort of low-key kind of people. Unless you get their blood up, unless you do what you've done here, then they're going to go in a fight mode. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. They will push all the way through to everywhere they need to go. They'll win everything. They haven't even unleashed their air power. And NATO is just going to be sitting there twiddling their thumbs as they fall apart, as we go to pre-Schengen Agreement Europe, where every single country in Europe is its own tribe, its own language, its own culture, as it should be. There shouldn't be any European culture. There is none. I was born in Scotland. My dad's side are all German. So I got Scottish and German. I've been to, you've been all over too. The Irish and the Scottish and the Norwegians and the Finns and the Danes and the Swedes and the French, and they're all different. And they pride themselves on that different. That's been kind of watered down. But now that all of this is breaking up Europe, you could have a rediscovery of that. And the thing that could quicken it, of course, too, And I want to go into this is a good transition to the Nord Stream 2. The thing that could quicken the decompartmentalization of Europe is the separate and distinct agreements for energy and security that each country could be making with Russia outside of the European Union NATO parameters. That doesn't mean they eject NATO. They can always say, I'm keeping my NATO ticket, but I'm joining this other club too. I'm joining BRICS. I'm joining the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement. I'm making a pact saying, hey, we won't pick a fight with you. You don't pick a fight with us, and we get oil and gas. I could see something like that begin to manifest because of necessity, the absence of heating oil and fuel and fertilizer and all of these things that the West has poisoned itself with, which has driven this has served as like a serious detoxifier or enema to Russia. All of the economic actions we've done have helped purge Russia of the, I like your term, the narcotic of consumerism and the selfishness and the hedonism that goes along with a lot of that. I think Russia is going back to its Spartan type black bean or bread soup or whatever it was the Spartans had. Very simple, very nourishing. I think Russia is moving that same way. Simple, nourishing culture and purging itself of through necessity because of what the West's been doing through sanctions. But I want to go in the direction of, okay, how do you see the Nord Stream pipeline destruction and how that is going to develop, and also, you know, how do you see that developing politically, economically for the fundamental changes that may be happening coming into Europe, and maybe address, do you see the same thing, that Europe is inevitably going to have to be making new agreements with Russia and ejecting the stupidity of Ursula von der Leyen and Macron and these other delusional people that think they can go into an endless emotional tantrum against Russia. Go ahead.
Well, Nord Stream 2, we'll start with that. You know, it's, first of all, people have to understand, before Nord Stream 2 was Nord Stream 1. That was completed in 2012. This was also something the United States didn't like. Nord Stream 1, you know, basically was a direct feed between Russia and Germany, as opposed to the old Soviet era pipeline connectivity that went through Eastern Europe and then fed in. This was direct connectivity. And the United States always believed that this was bad for Europe and bad for Germany because it made them too dependent on Russian gas. You know, I'm not an economist, and I can't say that I've studied this to any depth, but I will say this. Just common sense dictates that over the course of the past 60 years, the price differential between market rate for energy and the rate that Europe was paying for Russian gas, that there is a significant gap there, and that Europe was able to save trillions and trillions of dollars that they then invested into the European society. And, you know, there's a reason why Europe has, you know, free education, free healthcare, you know, decent infrastructure, things like that. They can afford it. And they afford it because of the differential between energy and not. And the clearest evidence of how this is so is when you take away Russian gas, Europe can't afford to exist. The market rate is just too expensive for Europe, especially when the market gets squeezed by the United States, by American actions, by the actions of the Europeans themselves, and cause prices to skyrocket. The United States has never made it a secret that they view what the Germans are doing as being counterproductive to American national security. We've always expressed a desire for Europe, for Germany, to break free of its quote unquote addiction to Russian gas. You know, the notion, though, that Russia would weaponize energy is just against reality. First of all, the Russians never weaponized energy. Even today, it's not Russia weaponizing energy. It's not that Russia's hitting the off switch. It's that Europe's hitting the off switch. This is literally a self-induced coma by Europe. But one of the dangers of hitting an off switch is that if you come to your common sense, you can hit the on switch. In Nord Stream 2, even though the off switch had been hit, had been fully pressurized, and it was just hanging there. And the Russians were sort of hinting at it. They said, this could all end tomorrow. All you have to do is stop the sanctions, and we will click back on the gas, and you guys will be warm this winter. And the German people heard that, and they started taking to the streets. They started putting pressure on their government, including, the government that also, has a foreign minister who said, I don't care what the Germans think, I will do whatever necessary. And I think that outraged some German people. So they were in the streets and they wanted Nord Stream 2 to be turned back on. And I have to say that the government of Germany, being consisting as it does of politicians who are useless to society unless they win re-election, we're starting to feel the pressure of that. And their great American friend and ally, who of course only listens to their internal telephone calls because we care, we're picking up on the fact that the Germans were heading in a direction that we didn't want them to head into. And so now we come to the great question. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline and Nord Stream 1 pipelines were both destroyed. Not completely destroyed, but they were punctured in a way that makes them non-functional. Okay, let's call it a whodunit. I mean, let's just pretend for a second we're at one of those theaters where we are going, oh, who did this? There's a knife in the back of this person. Who did this? Well, in the United States, we have prosecuted and convicted, and there are people in jail for purely circumstantial cases, What you need to show as a prosecutor is intent. You need to show motive, and you need to show means. Biden, we have him confessing the crime, pretty much. If the Russians move into Ukraine, I will shut down Nord Stream 2. I will shut it down. Even if the Germans don't want me to, I will shut it down. It will go away. Okay, I mean, that's pretty much a confession.
Yep.
Now, but what's the motive behind that? Okay, we have your tank. You want to shut down, but why would you? Blinken, this is a great opportunity for us now. Invest and to get this away. So we now have another confession right there. Boom. I'm able to convict, but gosh, I need the murder weapon. Wait a minute, didn't the US Navy hold significant underwater exercises over this very area in July? And then they come back with specific technology in September, including on the date that stuff was hit. I could take this to any court in America and convict the United States guilty of committing an act of international terrorism. We have convicted terrorists for less than this. Well, I mean, yeah, she's part of yeah, we have her statement as well. Well, the point is, there is no question about who did this, literally. The only reason there's a question is, like most criminals, the United States is seeking to deflect. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And what politician has been caught or being investigated for something says, I'll investigate and get to the bottom of this? They won't investigate. The United States, I love this one, we're going to send our Navy down there to investigate. They did it. They did it. And you're going to send them to it. And, in the hypocrisy of Europe to sit there and go along with it. I mean, Europe knows who did it. Everybody knows who did it. Yeah. It's not a secret, but Europe can't admit that America did it because that's a declaration of war against Europe. Well, the people of Europe aren't stupid. And they are figuring this out. And there's an anger growing that will manifest itself in, I believe, to be as complete a divorce from the United States as possible. This divorce becomes more and more doable because people have always said, well, you can't break away from America because the economic cost is too great. But if your economy collapses, there is no economic cost because now you've gone to zero and now you need to build back up, and you just say no to the side that got you to zero. And you say yes to the side that's been willing to help you throughout, which is Russia.
And giving you free bread and energy and things to tide you over. Because
Russia is, instead of the United States coming in, I mean, the United States reminds me of the movie, we're getting to the holiday season now. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
And you got Jimmy Stewart trying to do the right thing. Jimmy Stewart's in Russia, trying to do the right thing.
Yes.
Then you got that banker. That banker's out there to set you up, get you to collapse and seize your house and seize your property. And that's the United States.
Yeah.
And basically, we're going to have that Jimmy Stewart moment at the end of the movie where everybody recognizes that the banker is the most evil person on the face of the earth, Potterville. Europe doesn't want to become Potterville. It is Potterville now. It's 100% Potterville. It's owned by Potter, who doesn't care about them, only wants to make money off them. But when they collapse, it's Jimmy Stewart's. It's going to come in, and Russia is Jimmy Stewart. They're trying to do the right thing here. Russia's not sought to destroy Europe at all. Russia's bent over backwards to help Europe not commit suicide.
Yeah.
But the United States took these pipelines out. And, look at the Turks. Now, Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is an ally of the United States, ally of Great Britain. What's the first thing that Turkey did after Nord Stream went out? They immediately mobilized the military to secure the Turk Stream pipeline.
Yes.
They also put every British passport holder under close surveillance because they don't trust any of them. They know who the enemy is. Everybody knows who the enemy is. But Europe can't afford to yet say who because the consequences of acknowledging what the United States did, it's like having a close family member who's committed the most horrific crime in the world. And you still invite them to Thanksgiving because nobody talks about it. But the moment somebody brings it up and says, "You did this," and everybody turns, you have to kick them out of the table. They have to kick out of the house, and they're never invited back in. The United States is that family member.
That's right.
We're the most horrific person in the world. They continue to invite us to the table because I bring the turkey. But at the end of the day, when it becomes clear that what I've done far outweighs any benefit from it. Plus, the turkey now is small, and it turns out it's spoiled, and I'm done. And I think the United States is about to get disinvited from Europe. That's just the way it's going to be. Europe's path to recovery is through Moscow, not Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Europe's path to destruction was through Washington, D.C., not Moscow.
Mm-hmm. An absolute right on target assessment. I said exactly the same thing yesterday. In fact, we were doing a program and I said exactly precisely the same thing, that this is going to trigger a eruption of hostility, anger, resentment, and a divorce from the United States among all the common people of Europe, who are going to now begin to feel the suffering, hunger pangs, and coldness that comes from an American-directed policy of sabotage and an action of criminality. It shows utter contempt for Europe and European people. This is what's going to come out. Their sense of pride and anger and resentment, the emotional fury at this, at being subjected to this, is going to overwhelm any political reason calculations of, well, we still need America at the party. No. By doing this, I think you are going to erupt and certainly create opportunities for rising political voices that chart a new course, that say, no, there is a different way that we need to go. That's been the failure of imagination too. And maybe we can end on this and get your assessment. The failure of imagination has been lack of people standing up saying exactly that. We do not need the genetically modified spoiled turkey and cultural perversion and poison and toxicity of the United States and its pornographic world and endless wars and all of this garbage that they've been spewing out on the petrodollar. We don't need that. We need bread, fuel, supplies. We need peace. We need stability. We don't need a bioweapon terror. And the new way is towards Russia, because it is offering a healthier alternative. And the analysis, the sifting of this choice is going to show more and more Russia doesn't have an alternative agenda. It's not doing some secret operation. It is never changed. It's not in their DNA personality. They're simply presenting, this is the way. You want to go. You don't have oil, don't have fuel. It's very simple. So the failure of imagination of new political leaders rising up saying this is the way that we need to go. I think that's happening in that Burina, that I never even knew that country existed before too. The Burina
Faso.
Yeah, there you go. And they're rejecting the French and all that and waving Russian flags. I was like, whoa. I mean, maybe it's like Haiti, but it's still a significant thing to see that ripple effect. So, Scott, I want to ask you, what is the imagination of the person or the politician or the new leader that rises up? What is their speech and their imagination going to be, given this choice that, okay, we got the murder of the Nord Stream pipelines by the United States, the liar, the hypocrite that have done this to hurt us, to despoil us, and to make us pay 10 times as much and engage in all of this war and chaos. That's this side, and then there's this other side with pro-Russia, rediscovering our national identity, getting out of the EU, getting out of NATO, getting out of all this constricting Fourth Reich stuff. What do you see the new political mind and new imagination and vision is going to be coming up? What's going to be floating to the surface in Europe in response to this?
I think it's impossible to know, because when you take away the pillars of European civilization, so to speak, all these nations are going to have to go on a path of rediscovery.
Yes.
Because they've so deviated from, and this is the path that Russia was heading to, where you stop being yourself and you start being something totally different. The moment a German stops being a German, starts being a member of the European community, that's the end of Germany. Right. Same thing. And I'm not being racist here. That doesn't mean that Germany can't be a nation that allows immigrants to come in and be absorbed into Germany and live in accordance with Germans' norms and values. If you want to resettle in Germany, then you have to adapt to the German way of doing business. If you want to resettle in Italy, there's an Italian reality that you have to deal with. There's not a European reality, because Europe doesn't exist. There is no, but they've tried to create this, and they were trying to suck Russia into that. And so you saw in Russia, there were people who stopped knowing what being Russian was. Yeah. All they wanted to do is is align themselves with this consumer-based narcotic of unity and woke and wonderful and all that. And they forgot what it meant to be a Russian, just like the Europeans have forgot. So there's going to have to be a journey of rediscovery, and that journey is not predictable. The outcome is not predictable. So I can't talk about, with any sense of authority, what Europe is going to look like. It's going to be different. It's going to be different. It could be different in a better way. It could be different in a worse way. But it's going to be fundamentally different. And this is a scary thing, because I'd like to be able to say, oh, I can predict that it's going to be good. It's not. I can't say that. It's going to be different. Yeah. The role the United States is going to play, and this is the tough one, because I assume, like you, we're both patriotic. We love our country. And I love my country to the extent that I respect differences of opinion. I have some very strongly held opinions on things, but what makes America wonderful is that we allow everybody, or at least we should allow everybody, to voice their opinion. So let's say, even though I disagree with the transgender narrative and agenda, it doesn't mean I silence them. It doesn't mean that I oppress them. It doesn't mean that. It means that if I want to engage into a intellectual discussion with them, I bring better ideas. And then I convince people that my ideas are better, that people align with me, not to destroy them, but to make us better. It doesn't mean that we eliminate transgender. I don't think in America we can or should be doing that. It just means that, while we protect the rights of minorities, you can't allow minority issues to define the collective. And there's a struggle there that has to take place. It's best taking place in an environment where free expression is encouraged, where people are allowed to come out and vote. And this is what I believe is the American way. Now, we haven't been functioning this way at all, and all that. I want us to get back on that path. If we were ever on that path, because it's been a struggle since I've been around. It's always that you have political and economic elites dictating as opposed to the people dictating. But if we turn to basics, I also want my country to be seen in the world as the good guy. Yeah. I don't want us to be kicked out of Europe. I don't want that. As much as I respect Russia, I'm not willing to yield anything to Russia. I'm sorry, Russia. You do Russia, I'm going to try and make America a better place to live. I'm going to try and make us a better neighbor. It doesn't mean that I want to destroy you. No, it does mean I'd like to be friendly with you. Yes. But I understand if you can't trust me anymore. But at a minimum, I don't want to be at war with you. I don't want to be in conflict with you. I think we should find a way for peaceful coexistence while I do my thing and you do your thing. And hopefully someday we can come together and do it together. But we've got to, I mean, I just don't want to give up on America. I don't want to give up on America. I want America to come out of this very difficult situation that it's in. And this is why I'm against one political party dominating the other. I think there has to be a return to the center. I think there has to be compromise. I think we have to find a way to get 79 million people and 81 million people to come together so that in the middle is what we get is about 150 million people that think relatively the same. Not always agreement, because, nations that align totally in agreement, they tend to stand up tall, they put on armbands, and they put their hands in the air. I don't want that. I want the Americans to be sitting there debating, healthy debates, all this stuff about difficult issues where nobody's going to be happy, but at the end, you make the compromises necessary for us to move forward as a society. So I don't want America to leave Europe. I want America to re-engage with Europe in a constructive way. It'll be difficult because Europe may never trust us again after what we did.
Right.
But if the American people can start to make themselves manifest, to start to redefine the establishment, we have to, but in order to do this, we have to stop pretending that we get to dictate to the world.
Yes, exactly.
For America to become a better member of the global community, we have to turn inwards for a moment, and we have to fix ourselves. We have to redefine ourselves in a way that's honest about who we are, and therefore we can be honest to the world about what we want. But right now we're deceiving everybody because we're not honest with ourselves, and the world's starting to see through it. We sell the shining city on the hill. The world looks at us and sees homeless people and drug addicts on the street. We sell freedom of speech, but the world looks at us and says, no, you kicked everybody off Twitter, you shut down this, you don't have free debate, you're afraid of a difference of opinion. We say that we're about truth. There's nothing true coming out of America. We're one big lie.
Yes.
And we shouldn't be. So I'm hoping that from this chaos that's about to ensue, one, I wish the best for Russia. Don't get me wrong. I've worked there, I know them. I wish them the very best. And I actually believe that at this point in time, they're on the right side of history.
Yes.
But everybody that runs around says, well, you're pro-Russian, you're pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Russian. No. I don't dislike the Russians. I actually like the Russians, but I'm not pro-Russian at all. I wish them the very best, but I want me to do better. I want America to do better. I want America to be the nation. I mean, if the Russians are good, and there's nothing wrong with good competition. If I want to run on the high school track team and I walk out there and there's no one else running the 100-yard dash, how fast do you think I'm going to run? Not very fast, because I'm going to run as fast as necessary to win the race because there's no competition. I win the race every time, so I'm going to eat pizza and get fat and just boop, boop down there and win. But now if I got a guy that's out there saying, no, I want to be the fastest runner, oh my God, I got to start training. So I start training. And that's okay. We make each other better. And at the end, we have two guys on the team that are running very fast. That's awesome. Russia, run fast. Run as fast as you can. Be the fastest runner you can. I'm going to be faster. That's the approach we need to take. Not by cheating. I'm not going to Nancy Kerrigan them in the leg. I'm going to say, I'm going to help you run faster. We're going to train together. We're going to run up the hills together. We're going to do everything and make ourselves the best. But I'm going to beat you in the end because I want to be the fastest guy. But I'm not going to do it by tearing you down. I'm going to do it by making myself better. And if we would take that approach, look, we're going to, track is a season. You win some, you lose some. And some days I'm going to go out there and the Russians are going to kick my ass. Sometimes I'm going to go out there, I'm going to kick their ass. And at the end of the day, we stand on the podium, we shake each other's hand, and we say, better luck next time. And we keep moving. That's healthy. That's a healthy way of doing business. But in order to do that, we've got to become true to ourselves. So stop picking on Russia, people. All the people out there, it's an excuse. Literally, when you say I'm anti-Russian, what you're saying is you're anti-American.
Yes.
What you're doing is you're trying to find an excuse for our collective failures and blame it on someone else.
Yes.
High price at the pump, Putin didn't do that. We did it. You know, unemployment, Putin didn't do that. We did it. We did it. Own it. Take responsibility. Then make yourself better. That's the America that I would be proud of. We're never going to be perfect. Who amongst us is? But what we can do as a society, especially one as diverse as the United States, is we can at least have pure intent. We can say it's our intent to be better. The shining city on the hill's always going to have a house that needs repaired. It's always going to have a broken pipe. It's always going to have issues. That's okay. We wake up every morning and we fix the pipe. We fix the building. And we know that other things are going to crumble. It's never going to be utopia. It's going to be life. Let's do that. Stop blaming Russia for all that ails us. Russia is not the bad guy. They're not necessarily the good guy either. Russia has its own interests. Respect those. Doesn't mean that you surrender to them. But the best way to deal with Russian interests you disagree with is through competition. In a world where you don't have a rules-based order that's written by us, it excludes the Russians, where you have a law-based order where the law applies to all, and the side that can compete best within the framework of law prevails. And that doesn't mean that they're going to win forever. It just means that I got to train harder. So there it is. That's my 100-yard sprint, which I never ran, by the way. I was more of a long distance guy, but that's my analogy about track. It's not about winning all the time. It's about training hard.
Yeah. Amen. I think that's a brilliant analogy. And I think you positioned yourself as one of the best political analysts by drawing in the comparison and the analogy that America has become Tanya Harding and Europe is Nancy Kerrigan.
Well, there we go.
Hitting her with a gas.
Well, that was Nord Stream 2. That's right. We just bang it out.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan. Wow. They're dating ourselves. Well, I think you're right. I think the vision, as you laid out very eloquently, that's a brilliant way of summarizing it and at the same time distilling it. There has to be a sense of coming back, rediscovery, mea culpa, taking a mature stock of our identity, our past, our actions, who we are, what we want to be, and releasing the baggage and the Jacob Marley chains that are encumbering us. And I think Lindsey Graham is one hell of a chain that's stuck around our neck, and all these others that are pathologically, obsessively trying to go down this road of war. Those people just need to be cut off from our political consciousness and dialogue as dead weight, as old dead weight that really has no future, because they're so obsessed and so selfishly and self-righteously, pathologically, in this direction. We need to just get rid of them with new voices, new dialogues, new subjects, and new leaders. And I think we will. And I think you're identifying the direction of the imagination is very effective. Scott, I'll give you the last 15, 30 seconds if you want to say your closing words, and we'll end with that.
Oh, man. We live in difficult times. A lot of people are taking a look at the history today and saying they don't see an off-ramp for the United States and Russia. I would just remind people that we had difficult times in the 1980s, and yet Ronald Reagan found a way to sit down with Mikhail Gorbachev, sign the INF Treaty, and begin a process of trust-based, respect-based, mutually beneficial disarmament that led to the betterment of nations. That was just a moment in time. It was Camelot, and within several years, we were drifted away from that. But we can recapture that Camelot spirit, and this time learn from the mistakes of the past and keep it. So there's hope for the future. It's not all darkness. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully it's not an oncoming train.
Amen. Let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. I thank you for carrying the light, Scott. You're doing it very, very well. And we stand with you, and we are honored to have you with us. And we look forward to having you on again. God bless.